First of all, everyone, hello, I'm Julie.
So Julie, should we get started? And I'm sure people will start to ping in.
Yeah. Not sure if you could hear me just now. Can everyone hear me? Am I?
Yep.
Okay, great. Hi everyone, I'm Julie Szmyd. I'm host for this room and club. We are Consuli Conversations. Be sure to join our club and follow us for notifications. You can just tap the little green house icon at the top. You'll be able to see all our rooms there. We host 3 weekly rooms. So in addition to this, we have our clinical trials room and our long COVID patients meet researchers room. For this specific space, you can use the plus sign at the bottom to ping people in that you may think may be interested in the conversation. You can use the search bar to narrow to find specific people. And be sure to follow me and our moderators, panelists, and co-hosts here today. And additionally, we definitely encourage everyone to raise their digital hand and participate in the conversation. We'll certainly get to everyone as best we can. And additionally, to support those using closed caption, please state your name when you begin speaking and state your name again at the end. So for example, this is Julie speaking, and then at the end I would say, this is Julie and I'm finished speaking. Thank you. So that really helps our closed caption audience. Be sure to follow everyone. You'll see inside my bio, I just want to point out for any direct questions, comments, feedback, suggestions, if you want to participate in future panels or have suggestions for people that might be interested in participating, you'll find my email. You'll also find our social medias for Consuli, which please do follow. And for those that don't yet know Consuli broadly, Consuli is a public benefit company with the mission to enable individuals to participate in the data economy. And experts do suggest our individual data is worth approximately $20,000 per year. So we operate a marketplace for members where we become their data agent. So sorry. Can you hear me at the moment?
Yes.
Okay.
I can hear you just fine.
All right. So my connection is unstable. I apologize. All right. So Consuli is
You're an agent for data, for our personal data. Is that right? Yes. Just lost Julie for a second. So I'd like to introduce our panelists, and so that we'll get started here. So first up, I'd like to welcome Don Jones. Don is a globally recognized leader in digital medicine and first virtual healthcare delivery. He's an operating partner with Takeda Digital Ventures. He's an independent director on the boards of venture capital and private equity-backed companies with investors including Searchlight Capital, Flex, Takeda. His Fortune 1000 advisory roles have included Flex, Teva, JSR, Sanofi, Otsuka, Takeda again, AstraZeneca, Genentech, Cepheid, Mass Holdings, etc. He advises boards and executive suites on many of the largest pharmaceutical companies. He advised on the Verily Sanofi joint venture. He advises now also Zepp Health, the world's largest wearables company. He's a senior advisor with the McKinsey & Company and GLG Institute. Don serves as Chief Digital Officer of the Scripps Research Translational Institute, SRTI, collaborating with the Dr. Eric Topol. He co-founded Scripps Digital Medicine, the world's first digital health clinical trial center, and the nonprofit West Health Institute, raising over $130 million. In 2021, Don founded Impact, the virtual first medical practice collaboration in partnership with DIME, Digital Medicine Society, and the American Telemedicine Association. Previously, Don led Qualcomm's wireless health global strategy and founded its healthcare subsidiary. Lots of other wonderful accomplishments across many continents. And with that, I'll just, another notable is that he helped conceive the Qualcomm Tricorder X Prize, which was the global competition for a consumer device which successfully makes medical diagnoses. And last but not least, Don is a co-founder of Consuli. So Don, thank you and welcome. I'd like to next introduce Carmel. Carmel is the executive director of the Center for Health Law Policy and Biotechnology and Bioethics at Harvard Law School. She's responsible for oversight of the center's sponsored research portfolio, event programming, fellowship, student engagement, development, and a range of other projects and collaborations. Carmel was responsible for designing, recruiting, and launching both the center's Healthcare General Counsel Roundtable and the center's advisory board. She's involved heavily with the center's project on precision medicine, artificial intelligence, and the law. It is diagnosing in the home, and it's diagnosing in the home initiative. She's a lecturer at Harvard Law School, where she co-teaches a course on healthcare rights in the 21st century. Her fellowship focuses on health policy, in particular the regulation of access to care for vulnerable individuals, the use of telehealth and digital health products, and the application of public health ethics to real-world solutions and questions. She's been published in the New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, Hastings Center Report, Nature Medicine, and has been interviewed and quoted in outlets such as BBC News, Politico, CNN, Slate, etc. So she's also written a number of books, including Transparency in Health and Healthcare in the United States, Disability, Health, Law, and Bioethics. So thank you, Carmel, for being with us. Fabulous to have you here. The next two panelists here, Ethan Pierse. He is an American living in France. As an entrepreneur, he has built companies in the US, France, and Singapore, and is currently founder at Borderless Ventures, helping startups scale between Europe, Southeast Asia, and the US, as well as director of the Crypto Assets Institute, advising governments, corporates, and investment funds on issues related to the blockchain economy and crypto assets. In 2019, he gave 65 keynote speeches and conferences in 26 countries. Last year, he spoke at even more digital events, but from the comfort of his home in Paris. He also moderates 5 to 10 events per week, as well as several innovation-focused podcasts. His blockchain economy newsletter and podcast is a top 5 podcast in the non-crypto blockchain space, and also hosts French tech news and English language media, highlighting news in the French tech startup ecosystem. Welcome, Ethan. And Amber Marie Brandner is led by curiosity in our collective potential of producing a comprehensive approach to addressing our global challenges. She's facilitated workshops for the LA Mayor's Office, colleges, UCSD, Sony, and Nearsoft. She has spoken at Maker Faire, Startup Grind, Thrive Talks, and continues to share her message of embodied inclusion around the world. Welcome, Amber. And I know we have Yvonne. And so Yvonne, I think I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, and we'll start with you, since I don't have your bio, but thank you for joining us right before we started. Yeah. Yvonne, I'm going to push it to you. This is Elizabeth. I'm done speaking.
Thanks, Elizabeth. This is Yvonne speaking. I'm happy to do that. I have a background in the tech industry. I focused on cybersecurity, identity management, privacy, and enterprise architecture. at Sun Microsystems, or Zero. I founded a suite of identity management services at Oracle Managed Cloud Services, and used the experience from that to publish a book on identity management. Really a technical book, solving identity management applications. And currently I serve as a cybersecurity advisor for diverse tech startups, and I'm the chief strategy officer for a new startup called Exploit Defense. We've started a cybersecurity consulting firm. And that was Yvonne speaking.
Thanks so much, Yvonne. This is Elizabeth. Okay, so I'm going to pass the mic to Dawn Jones to kick us off here. So Dawn, the floor is yours. This is Elizabeth. I'm done speaking.
Hi, this is Don Jones. Nice to be here and nice to meet everybody. And maybe I'll just have a few comments, but on data. I work currently with probably about 20 different companies, all of which are generating a wide array of health data and financial data regarding individuals. And the most interesting of those companies are now finding ways to essentially share some of the value of that data back with the donating individual. And one good example that I could just bring to light here, just because it actually played into how Consuli came about. There's a company called Sanguine that serves the marketplace of research labs doing clinical R&D work, mainly for the pharmaceutical industry. And here, what they've managed to do is build cohorts of patients who contribute their medical data and their willingness to participate in clinical trials before a trial even exists. And the Sanguine acts as their agent to pharmaceutical companies that want to find very hard to find rare disease populations. And in exchange, the pharmaceutical companies agree to do things for the patients that make the trial more convenient, like doing all the testing at home, as an example. And this was the beginning of recognizing that there was a value proposition that could be exchanged for the individuals. And when Elizabeth and our other founders and advisors got together, we said, how can we essentially cut the individual into the value proposition that's being offered by the large companies in exchange for personal data? And that was the birth of really the ideas that went into Consuli. And at the end of the day, as Elizabeth has said, we're all donating direct.
With that, I'd like to turn the mic over to Carmel. Carmel, the floor is yours. This is Elizabeth, and I'm done speaking.
This is Carmel. So I deal with data in the healthcare context, where it is considered especially sensitive by most people. It tells something very personal about your medical information. But I think what is really, really interesting, I would say, are two things: that there are a lot of different perspectives on who owns data and what are the rights and responsibilities. Patients feel like they have ownership over their own information, whereas large hospitals feel like we put a lot of time and effort into compiling these databases. We have some sort of ownership of this information. And then I think the other thing, especially in the US, that is really interesting is this explosion of digital health tech, which may or may not intersect with the medical system, and the ways in which it doesn't also influences the levels of protection that are given to an individual's data and how much control that they may have over them. So everybody talks about HIPAA, but HIPAA applies only in this really narrow context of you're at the clinic or hospital and something's being entered into your medical record. And now we have so many amazing companies that are doing important health work outside of those two settings. And so catching up expectations, but also regulations to reflect this new health data economy is something that is really interesting. And this is Carmel.
Thanks, Carmel. This is Elizabeth. we'll pick back up on that very important topic, which I think you're speaking to one of the key areas that needs to be continuing to be evolved. With that, though, I'd like to next turn the mic to Ethan. Ethan, the floor is yours. This is Elizabeth. I'm done speaking.
Thanks, Ethan Pierce here. So as far as, my interest really what's going on in data privacy and personal ownership of data, a lot of that is what I do through the Crypto Assets Institute, where we're leading really to a lot of enterprise blockchain solutions and other topics that are coming up now just around digital ID and how to potentially democratize access or control over a lot of that data. And I think the most current conversation that's really interesting is everything around digital health passports and vaccine passports. We've seen, the state of New York roll out their program using IBM's digital health passport. We see on the international level, we've seen a ton of stuff happening in Europe between the airlines and the governments looking to get people back traveling, especially for business, by allowing for either testing or vaccination or both type of passports. So I think this is a really interesting space that brings up lots of questions about, how is that data being used? How are we managing access to that? But it also, creates a lot of opportunity if it's done right, because depending on the technologies that are being leveraged, we really do kind of have a push and a pull system of being able to allow access and then pull back access to our data to create, interesting value propositions in these scenarios. One of the startups I'm advising right now is a German-based ticketing platform that is basically allowing, they have a solution that would allow museums or concert venues or festivals or pretty much any outlet that needs to control access to issue blockchain-based ticketing, which in one of their direct applications is really about solving scalping and the kind of automated purchasing of tickets at launch of a big concert series or something like that. But what's following up to that that's really interesting is their platform now allows for venues to be able to do socially distanced seating, allows for them to be connected to, for example, the IBM's Digital Health Pass or the IATA, the International Air Travel Association's pass that they're working on, which is a standard being pushed across a bunch of airlines and other things. So that inside of the app, whenever you're scanning into a venue with your digital ticket, it's able to actually show your vaccination or testing status by pulling that information from the related trustable government sources. I think there's a lot of brilliant applications there that can be really useful, but also we need to make sure that privacy is respected and that we have control over that information. But the technologies that are being leveraged in these situations really, for me, provide a level of confidence that we haven't currently had because of just legacy database-based systems that would allow pretty much anybody to have access, didn't really allow you to pull back your authorization for that information. So I'm super excited about that space and where that's going. On that specific travel piece, in the past week, I've had 3 different conferences, 2 in Dubai and 1 in Southeast Asia, that have asked me to come in May or June to speak if I'm a vaccinated speaker. And so that's already happening. There are 2 conferences that have been announced here in Paris for the summer that they are open to being digital, but for now they're planning to do them in person, respecting social distancing and masking and testing beforehand and all those kind of things. So it looks like there is also a big movement to kind of get us back into some sort of business contact at conferences and internationally by leveraging these technologies. But there's going to be a larger conversation around how that data is being managed and kind of this 2-class system of the vaccinated and the non-vaccinated. And so anyways, I find that super fascinating and lots of cool stuff coming.
Thanks, Yvonne. Very much appreciate that. And I'd like to next turn the floor to Amber. This is Elizabeth. I'm done speaking.
Hey, okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah, so very interesting to hear from everyone, the different angles that everybody's interested in this conversation from, and I share a bit of interest in all of it. Ethan, with your interest in blockchain and the way that crypto can be used specifically and all the many different use cases. So I find myself just really fascinated by what's available to manage data right now. The ways that we're able to use data in AI, machine learning algorithms, and just how high that value is, and how we have perhaps disregarded stakeholders in the past when we look at a broader spectrum of stakeholders, because anyone who's helping to inform, this data is somebody who has a stake, right? And so I think I'm just curious of how this is going to play out. And I also, for as much as I love technology and the possibilities within blockchain and NFTs and DeFi and all of this, when it comes to our own data, our own information, I think that, like you kind of mentioned the two classes of vaccinated or not, that question of just like, should we always have a right to choose in our participation, a right to choose if we participate. So, you look at the world around us, and there's definitely places on this globe where people don't have a choice. And in many cases in the US, we maybe don't even, the choice isn't really presented to us, it's hidden, it's obscured, or we're not informed. So yes, I think that it's going to be an interesting time ahead of us in this space, and I'm hoping for the best. And I'm hopeful in a lot of companies that are doing great work in this. I'm sure Consuli being one, and Dawn's company as well, Luna DNA, and just these different organizations that are really being thoughtful about their approach. And it is at the end of the day human lives and the welfare of all. So everything that we have an opportunity to actually think about the human first and how we're going to be equitable in this. And so, cheers to everyone for stealing it.
Thanks, Amber. This is Elizabeth, and I want to now get into the meat of the discussion. I appreciate the opening remarks and kind of getting a sense of where everybody's coming from. I think that's a great beginning. And I want to pick up on the intriguing point that Carmel made about, kind of the laws and policies catching up. And the different levels of protection that people may perceive they have versus what they do have. And so I'd love to turn the floor over to you, Carmel, and to hear more about where you think where we are on that front, and where you think that's going, particularly in the United States, and I guess elsewhere if you're able to comment. This is Elizabeth. I'm done speaking.
This is Carmel. So, sure, Elizabeth, I think that we are at a really interesting time when it comes to data regulation. I always like to contextualize HIPAA by saying it's from 1996. Think about where all of our technology usage was in 1996 and how different the approach to data was back then. And it wasn't even really meant to be a data privacy statute. That wasn't actually the focus of it. So it has this approach that data is very self-contained, that it's relatively easy to understand the flow of it, the uses of it. And it has this approach that is very much, as I mentioned, based in, is this information part of a medical record? if so, then we think it deserves additional protections. And it also has an approach that is very authorization based. So with HIPAA, you can't do a lot unless you get an individual's authorization, in which case you can do quite a lot as long as they sign off on it. In the last several years, I think we've seen a shift to kind of newer data regulation statutes, such as the GDPR coming out of Europe or the California Consumer Privacy Act, that have a broader view of data, that say data gets used all the time. There need to be some core rights of individuals whose data is being used, such as the right to be forgotten. And we think that most data tells a story about an individual, and therefore pretty much all data should have some protections. I think an interesting area in the past year or so that we've seen arise from the fact that HIPAA doesn't reach everywhere is in all of these apps that are meant to really help with the COVID-19 pandemic. So what were called digital contact tracing apps last spring, and now we're starting to talk about vaccine certification or passport apps. They can be constructed in ways that HIPAA never applied. But I think we'll assume, oh, well, this is health information. This is really personal, so I get medical protections when they don't actually. This is Carmel. I'm done speaking.
Thanks, Carmel. I'd like to maybe hear from others on the panel on this particular topic. And before we dive into that, I just want to sort of set the table with a little continuation of some of the topics that emerged in a few of our last conversations. And, and I'm putting this on the table so that as you guys are responding to Carmel's points, we can also bring in some of these other dimensions. So one of the key things that emerged last time was, stakeholders, there's really no solution that will protect individuals from government actors, right? And so there was a big discussion about weaponizing commercial assets. There was a discussion around, the positives and the negatives, right? The state actors, in addition to, being very interested in the data, they're also worried about the micro-targeting of data and the negative influence on the sort of human behavior. So there's a whole thread around the state actor, distinct from commercial actor, just throwing that on the table. The other key areas that were talked about were around the 21st century law, that, the issue around medical data. And I know we're talking about data more broadly, but there is a theme, and there are a number of folks on the panel who come from the medical lens. So, that particular body of work, there was a discussion about, while it seems like it's making data more liquid, they were saying a lot of the pieces of data, labs, genetic images, historic data that's essentially trapped on PDFs. There was a discussion around meaningful advocacy still needed to bring even that brand new piece of legislation forward and up a level in terms of real utility. I'll pause there on those two. There's a number of others, but I'd love to, pass the mic around. And if you want to flash your mic, if you're on the panel, please feel free to do so if you'd like to weigh in on any of those topics. And then also just a reminder for those in the audience, if you raise your digital hand, we'll add you to the stage. And when we get to that section, we'll be taking folks. Ethan, I see you flash, so thank you very much. I'm going to pass the mic to you. This is Elizabeth. I'm done speaking.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Ethan here, mostly because I have to leave in 10 minutes, and I didn't want to have to chime in later and say that I was just leaving without having contributed anything. So really, it's what's interesting for me on all these discussions, if we pull back to the larger data discussion in general, but especially with what was just mentioned about regulation and how we see that, is the important consideration that we are definitely in a global economy, and that it's not, obviously securing data and privacy rights is incredibly important. And I would no way want to minimize how important that is from a personal rights perspective. But I also think that when we're looking at regulation, we need to be extremely cognizant of the fact that regulation can potentially create a lot of friction around which countries and which geographies are attractive to where the digital economy is going. And so I think that we need to weigh both of those to make sure that we are adequately and correctly protecting people in terms of data privacy, but we also create systems that encourage innovation and that are very much innovation friendly, so that we don't run into a situation where, like we've seen a lot with what's gone on in the blockchain economy, where companies, for different reasons around regulation, have jumped from regulatory environment to another by changing countries in order to be able to do what they're going to do. That's different. That's a lot around securities laws and people doing potentially bad things financially. But what we have seen is a tendency for companies to go where they can do business. And so I think that it's incredibly important that we also realize that we need to be strategic about how we respect data privacy, so that we also create an environment where companies are encouraged to stick around and to build things everywhere, and not simply go away to somewhere else where they are less controlled or less oversight. And so I think that that's incredibly important. Obviously, from a GDPR perspective or a CCPA perspective, you're still under regulatory responsibility, even if you're somewhere else, if your customers are in those spaces. If you've got California customers, the CCPA applies. It doesn't matter where you put your company. But I think that that's important to consider, because I do think we are seeing, especially with what we're going to see kind of with the post-COVID economy, we are seeing countries that are being very aggressive about wanting to put in place. Dubai is one of the ones specifically right now that I see. I mentioned a couple of the speaker invites from the past week, but I've had over 10 in the past probably month and a half for events in Dubai over the next coming months, because Dubai is being extremely aggressive about wanting to make sure that when business opens up, it opens up in Dubai. And so I think, when we're looking at the Emirates, or if we're looking at Singapore, wherever it is that there are governments that are being very aggressive about making sure that they will be well placed when things open up post-COVID, whether that's vaccination or testing or whatever. And so I think when it comes to the data privacy question, we do need to make sure that we are adequately protecting people to the extent that we definitely should. But we also need to realize that simply having a privacy first discussion that ignores what could potentially be an impact if governments or corporations decide to react to those regulatory frameworks by potentially doing things differently or somewhere else. I think it's just important. So again, it's not to necessarily say that we need to do less, it's simply to be sure that we are wise about when we want to see the appropriate regulation put in place to protect data privacy, that we also realize that there is a global game in play about how information is going to be treated and shared and monetized. And it's incredibly important that we think globally and not just from the US perspective about these things, or from the EU perspective, simply because we've already seen over the past few years or so in the blockchain economy a tremendous amount of movement, people chasing friendly regulations. And again, that's not to be compared, but I'm also starting to see on the event side of things and on the data side of things when it comes to the vaccination stuff, that there's already lots of stuff being put into place globally in several regions to make those places attractive now, let alone over the next few months and years. And so I think we need to, how do we approach that best? How do we protect people's privacy? But how do we also not limit innovation and economic development? How do we find the right balance?
I appreciate that, Ethan. This is Elizabeth. I want to maybe steer our conversation a little bit into the corridor around, there's privacy and then there's ownership rights, right? And the intersection of those two, they mean different things, right? So I'm curious, and folks, feel free to flash your mics. I was going to just ask Carmel again, but I'd love to hear from others on the panel too on this particular topic, what the state of play is. And also, Ethan, before we lose you, the issue of privacy and rights and how folks are being treated relative to the economic interest of their rights is an area that I think we're very interested in as an organization, and see that some of the regulations point in the right direction, and there are aspects of refinement that seem like they're going to be needed broadly. And I think, Ethan, your point about the global paradigm to think about is a good one, particularly for us myopic Americans from time to time. So I'd love to, if somebody would flash their mic in the panel, if you'd like to contribute. I'd love to hear from you, or I'll call on you, either way. I think, Don, did you flash?
Yeah, it's Don Jones. I'll just reflect back on something that I've used a number of times to kind of get at some of the issues that you're raising. It's often when I'm working inside of a medical device company or a pharmaceutical company, the presumption is we own the data, the company owns the data, it's siloed solution, and it's our data. Then they start wanting to do partnerships with other companies, and effectively what happens is you get into a security discussion and argument about data rights that really doesn't go anywhere and wastes a lot of time. The model that I have used successfully many, many times is the same model we use out of the telecom industry, which is a license data, which is to basically just resolve the issue and say there are lots of parties that need a license to the data. We can just default and let's say that the consumer owns the data that they generate, but I, the company, maybe the device company, the pharmaceutical company, the doctor, the hospital system can get a license to it. And then you have the beginnings of a structure that actually fits into a legal structure quite nicely. And so what I'm basically saying is, if instead of arguing about who owns the data, turning it slightly into a discussion about who should be able to license the data and how should we be able to structure those licenses, tends to take a lot of the problematic elements of data sharing off the table and makes it much more straightforward. This end of time.
Thanks, Don. I know it takes a little work to get at the closed captions. I'm still working on it myself. It's like Elizabeth out. That doesn't quite sound right, though, does it? At any rate, Carmel or Ethan, would you like to weigh in here? Ethan, I saw you flash your mic, so I want to make sure we get you.
Well, and Don, we don't want the end of you, so please don't go. And this is Ethan. Yeah, that is a complicated thing that's trying to figure out, and they are working on solutions to make that more natural, I think, just for people to use. But for now, that's the way to do it. My point was Don said something very interesting working with corporates. For me, it wasn't necessarily personal data, but in some ways it was. But for several years, I was managing partner of a fund based in Hong Kong and Singapore, and we built several dozen accelerators with large corporates across the region around Southeast Asia. And what was interesting to me was during the negotiation phase with these large corporates, and this was with mostly fintech and digital health, so it was large banks, large insurers, and other organizations, building their corporate innovation accelerator for startups. And the negotiation phase was always really curious because the thing that always stuck the most was the contract between the startups that would participate in the accelerator and the corporate about who would own and manage the data. And that was, there was a lot of, these were 6 to 7 figure programs. There was a lot of other details that had to be managed. These were startups coming from all over the world. So there was plenty of details that had to be dealt with. But the thing that always stuck was the IP. From the intellectual property side about, just if there was stuff that was, if there were innovations that were created together with the corporate or other things, who would have ownership and access to that, but very specifically around the data. And so I think it's interesting that, large corporates are very aware of not just their responsibilities in order to respect that, because that was part of it, was making sure they weren't doing anything wrong, but it was really much more about the value of it. And so corporates are very aware of the value of our data, and they don't often communicate that through to their consumers. In fact, so many of the offers now that we see are based around trying to provide cheap to free services in order for people to work with companies, and people not realizing that their data is actually the payment of that. We saw it recently with Robinhood, kind of exploding in the US with things and because of some issues around how they monetize and people's actual access to certain things. And I think that's an interesting conversation that, I'm what I come back to often when we deal with privacy issues, whether it's data privacy or others, is especially in a place like France where vie privée, privacy is pretty much constitutional in the sense that it's sacred here, and it's a very big topic around pretty much anything related to innovation. And what I find is always curious that people like to talk a lot about data privacy, but they don't tend to actually care much about it when it comes down to actually doing things. Like, it's people really get excited and frustrated about, Facebook had some kind of a problem, or some other company, lost their data or their credit card numbers or whatever. But when it comes to actually doing things about it, people tend to acquiesce a lot more easily than we would have hoped. And so I find that really, how do we address that? How do we create systems that really do protect people's privacy around their data, but do it in a way that's frictionless or friction light, so that people don't even have to really engage that much? Because the moment that we ask people to go through any kind of a complicated procedure, they don't do it. And without it being a direct corollary, there's a very distinct version of something that happened this week that kind of underlines this. In the world of crypto assets and cryptocurrencies, it's incredibly important that you have access to your private keys if you're trading in digital assets, because that's what those private keys for the encryption around the wallet that is holding your digital assets are what really declare the ownership of who has them. Whoever owns the private keys owns the assets. That's the end of that discussion. And there's no larger version of that. So the problem is how do you go to the retail market and get them to get excited about crypto, whether it's cryptocurrencies or other digital assets around tokenized securities, whether it's real estate, or now we're talking about nifties for non-fungible tokens and art and all kinds of stuff. So what's interesting there for me then that's become problematic is that a lot of the best solutions that really protect people's assets are the ones that the retail market and most people don't use because they're too complicated. And so what you see is a company like Coinbase, which this week, yesterday had its direct listing on the NASDAQ with over $100 billion market cap at its direct listing. And the exact only reason that company is worth so much and why they did $1.8 billion of revenue in the first quarter of this year with over $800 million of that in profit is because they have made it easy for retail investors to open an app, use their bank account or credit card, and buy the crypto that they want, because they just bypass the whole technical conversation. You don't actually have access to your private keys. You could lose all the crypto that you have in that. This is not an anti-Coinbase statement, but it's not a secure solution in the same way that other versions of owning access to that are. My point in connecting all this together is people will go for the lowest friction point that brings them the most value, and it doesn't always actually encourage good behavior. And so I wonder, in the larger data privacy discussion, how do we encourage people to actually take steps that protect their own data outside of regulation? Because people will potentially choose to sell their data or choose a less secure version of working with their data in return for some other value. So I'm not sure if that was coherent, but my issue with all of that is I see a ton of situations with startups where people tend to go for the lowest friction when it comes to things that they actually really do care about when they get vocal, but when it comes to actually spending their money or engaging with activities that have access to their data or private information, they sometimes make different decisions. That was Ethan.
Thank you, Ethan. No, I think the summary is it's got to be easy and frictionless was a key component. I see, Amber, you flashed your mic, and there's a lot that came up in that dialogue. I see Carmel as well. Amber, do you want to maybe weigh in? Then I'll go to Carmel. I'd love to hear from Yvonne, and then back to Dawn. I know we kind of are covering a lot in each of these dialogue sets, so maybe we bounce it around a little bit. Amber, the floor is yours. This is Elizabeth. I'm done speaking.
Hi, this is Amber. Yeah, I just thank you, Ethan, for what you shared. I think that the issue of like civic education, or where education is going to go around data privacy, data ownership, you know, economics even playing into this, like when and how, and is anyone on the call actually aware of, are there programs now, you know, for high school students that are equipping them? Because I think that the point of the sort of retail market, the crossing the chasm, right? So like there's all of these digital solutions and ways that we can be leveraging the data for good. But when people are uninformed entirely, or only hear about things in a negative context, such as with Robinhood or these other organizations, you know, having data breaches, I think that it paints, you know, just something that would be alarming. And unfortunately, I see some like protect your data, but it kind of feels a little bit like the, you know, see something, say something campaigns. So I think about, and I see Joel's on this call, and I was just, when I saw him, I was like, okay, well, I think about data and how we could address education as well through public art and things like that. I even consider, how can you use something like some sort of NFT auction or something to create a public art that's actually educational, that's using this data, you know, public data or something, so people actually understand, you know, the power of data, but also, you know, having it actually explain how data is related to ownership, leveraging, you know, leveraging data to make economic gains, and how are these people part of that? You know, yeah. So I guess I just think like in both ways, like how do we address that retailer, or just the human being that's out there, like a majority of us that are, you know, walk around not knowing, and then also start education around these things, maybe through an explorative lens versus this is how it is. But I just wonder.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Amber. And yeah, there is an element here of what we're, you know, hypothesizing, which is, you know, you assign value to it, and all of a sudden people become educated. I want to make sure we get other folks on the panel as well. Yvonne, I see you flash your mic. Love to hear from you next, and then Carmel.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that, you know, you can't have privacy without security. And we've created a model where data has become very valuable, or rather it is. You know, if I charge a person for a service that I'm giving them, I can charge them once, but if I get their data, that's something that I can sell again and again, or use, or as Dawn pointed out, many can license the data. I use the word sell very loosely. And so we've got this commodity that's become very valuable. And the approaches that we've used in the past, often manual, have not been working very well. It's, you know, we don't have a very good story. We've had a lot of breaches in the industries. So it's going to take a lot more automation, and which requires investment and a level of effective cooperation that we don't really have today, that's making individual companies, they're very hard pressed to keep up by themselves. And I think we're going to need to understand the security aspects of these things. Just one example, there was a mention of health passports or vaccination passports earlier, and I was having a conversation with someone having deployed strong forms of authentication in the past. They were asking if a certain organization was going to deploy a vaccination passport, and I pointed out, you know, just like our real world passports, any sort of digital credential like that, you know, it has to be issued by an authoritative source to be trusted. There has to be a secure process for issuing it out to people, so it can't be stolen or given to the wrong person. You have to have mechanisms in it that it can't be forged, otherwise it becomes worthless as a credential. And you have to have a way of validating it at an enforcement point, much like you see people doing at airport security today when you give them your ID. So there's a lot of thought that needs to go into designing secure processes that when people start to design them, sometimes they don't realize that there's a security in the process as well as the actual physical or digital devices that you might use for that. And so there's going to be a need for security technology as well as a lot of policy, as I think Amber was just saying. That, you know, just one example, we have regulations that you can't use stolen IP, and we probably need the same, you know, we need to think through and make sure that we've got adequate legislation. So I'll stop there. That was Yvonne.
Yvonne, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And it's a really good point, and one that, you know, should not be lost on any of us. I'm curious, Carmel, if you want to weigh in on, you know, I know there've been a lot of discussions here about different topics, but many come back to, you know, legal frameworks and regulatory aspects in addition. So I'd love to hear from you. And then Dawn, I see you flashed your mic. We'll go to you next. So this is Elizabeth. I'm done speaking.
Great, this is Carmel. I think that this is a really tricky area to navigate because on one hand, it feels wrong to say individuals don't have ultimate ownership or control over their data, especially when we might be talking, say, about patients with rare diseases where that information is legitimately hard to come by and very personal. On the other hand, I think one risk we have if we over-regulate data ownership is that we don't want to stifle innovation, and we don't want to stifle companies from really investing in their databases and data infrastructure and trying to do cool, interesting things with them. And I think right now the incentive of building a database that can do those things and is worth a lot of money is something that is very attractive and something that I've heard echoed on this panel by some of the other speakers. The other thing that I will say is I think that there is a little bit of a weird disconnect at times between the information that people put out there and then realizing, oh wait, this information is now out there in a way that I can't control. And the most recent example I've been given is that I think we've all seen people post on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and other places pictures of themselves getting vaccinated, where they'll even put up their CDC vaccination card with their thumb over the personal information. You know, if you're putting that up there, it's not crazy to think that your medical provider or employer or local government are monitoring social media and sort of counting that and trying to figure out, okay, who is vaccinated and who is not. So the idea, okay, I want to put this up, but I don't want it to be shared in any way that I don't want it shared. That's a really, really hard needle to thread, and not to say, oh, the onus is on the individual to never participate in the data economy unless they are comfortable with losing complete control, because sometimes we just have to. Like when I go to the doctor's office, I don't really read the HIPAA authorization forms because I think what would be in there that would make me say, okay, I don't want to see this appointment, or I don't want to get this vaccine, or I don't want to get this scan. Very little. So I might as well just do it and accept that my data is going to be used by the hospital system. However, but at the same time, I think, and this was something that other speakers on this panel have talked about, educating people on data privacy and data hygiene and how to be thoughtful about what data you're putting out there, I think is going to be really important, especially for this generation that has grown up fully digital natives and has just like such a crazy and rich digital record trailing behind them like breadcrumbs. So this is Carmel, I'm done.
Thanks, Carmel. Good points. Although I must say I'm in the same boat as you. I mean, there's the issue of having hygiene and being thoughtful, but then there's the other issue of the practical implication, like, you know, do you not sign the form even if you don't like it because you need care? So there's an interesting education on the one hand, but like, so what if your education doesn't lead you to being able to act in a different way? And I have a feeling it has to do with individually, we don't have very much power, so it needs collectivity. I'm going to turn the mic to Dawn, and I'll come back to that point. I'm sure that'll be a rich discussion. This is Elizabeth. I'm done speaking.
This is Don, and I was just going to comment on kind of the slippery slope here on what we're willing to give up without much thought versus what we want to think a lot about before we give it up. And I'll give you an example. Every day, we all give away one of our key pieces of identification, a number that identifies us, can be used to trace where we go, where we travel to, etc. And we voluntarily give it up every day. And it's our phone number every time we make a phone call that comes up and is recorded. And nobody thinks twice about that. And yet there's a ton of data attached to that call, and it's mostly discoverable. So I just point out that across the whole spectrum of what data you have control over and when you give it up, there's already a whole lot of data that we actually just spew out over the world without giving any thought to it, including data that can actually be used to track us back and actually communicate or connect back to us essentially instantaneously. So I just point out that, you know, to some degree you can say it's the horses out of the barn. Another degree, maybe it's what we're trading off for the convenience of using a phone, or maybe it's we just never thought about it. I'd stop signing off.
Okay. I like your signing off. We're getting a little better at this, you guys. I think I saw Amber flash your mic. I want to give her an opportunity. If you did, Amber, take yourself off mute and the floor is yours. This is Elizabeth and I'm signing off.
Honestly, it was just a quick comment based on what you had said before Dawn spoke, but I think I lost it. I didn't hold on to it.
That's okay. So. When you're ready, just come back and say you're ready. Flash your mic again. Yeah, I am curious, Carmel, I'm going to come back to you if I can. I'm curious whether, you know, I guess thinking about this issue of privacy versus ownership. And I'm wondering if you can speak to what you think the modernization might need to be around ownership, because I guess I'm going right to the point about, like, you know, the regulation, or excuse me, not the regulation, but, you know, I'm in a doctor's office, I need to see the doctor, and, you know, how am I going to avoid signing that, you know, that statement that basically gives up certain rights, and that feels like it's going to need to be more wholesale than any individual, right? Because I mean, what doctor office could I even go into that wouldn't make me sign up for certain things? So just curious what you think the state of new regs might need to be. This is Elizabeth, I'm done speaking.
This is Carmel. I will say, as a regulatory lawyer, I would prefer to see kind of more regulations and protections in this area, as opposed to just kind of saying to each individual, okay, you have ownership over your data, because ownership over your data, I think at times can feel somewhat meaningless. And to go back to that example of, you know, I signed the HIPAA waivers going into my physician's office, like up until that point, in a way, I own my data by just not allowing anybody physical access to it, right? Like if I don't show up to the doctor's office, they don't get any information about me. And so in some ways, I'm already making that kind of ownership trade-off where I say, I own this data, but I'm willing to trade it to the physician's office so that I can get medical care. Or, you know, people use Uber a lot and they're making that trade-off of I'm giving information about my whereabouts and where I want to travel to and what I'm doing in order to get access to this service. So I think if you just say to individuals, okay, you have ownership over your data, you're going to see something that kind of looks like that HIP authorization example where people say, okay, well, realistically, I really want to use this service. It's very useful. And so I'm going to trade away my ownership, my control over my data to access the service. I think approaching it the way that the European Union has done to say, all right, realistically, you're going to put your data out in the world and companies are going to take it and they're going to process it and they're going to compile it in ways that make it feel like they own it and they're going to try to capitalize on it. And that's okay because we want that to happen. We want that innovation to happen. But with that, there should come this basic suite of data rights. And now whether the GDPR or the CCPA has encompassed all of the rights that should be there, or maybe they've gone too far, you could make arguments either way, depending on your perspective. But I think that provides more meaningful protection to say, all right, even after I contract away my control over my data, I still have these regulatory rights. I can say, okay, I want you to pull my data. I want to be forgotten. I don't want to be included in this anymore. Or I want to see an accounting of how this data is being used. I think those are more useful levers than just telling an individual, okay, you own this data. Carmel, this is out.
Thank you, Carmel. I'd love to hear from Yvonne. I see you flashed your mic. And also, I just want to put in the field, you know, what about de-identified data anyway? I mean, is it really ever de-identified, you know, given, you know, the ways that one can recreate? Don used the use case of a phone number as a breadcrumb that leads to lots of other data. Yvonne, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. This is Elizabeth. I'm done speaking.
Thanks, Elizabeth. This is Yvonne. I just wanted to raise the point that we need to be careful in policies, et cetera, to remember that for many of us, it may be a convenience to give up some data to get an appointment or a service, but there's a lot of financially trouble or people under a great deal of financial pressure. And so that could possibly create an incentive to share data that could hurt them down the road. We need to make sure that they're not being taken advantage of. And then if there's a financial incentive, there's always going to be people who are going to want to game the system because there's some benefit to them. So could that then corrupt the data? You know, people thinking up ways to give data that maybe isn't correct just to get that financial award. So we're going to need to spend some time thinking about that when we design policies and legislation as well.
Yeah, thanks for that, Yvonne. Good points. And do you want to say anything about the whole idea of de-identified data as well?
Sure. It's definitely a valuable technique to use. There's a lot, the devil's in the details, and so it is a little bit tricky to do it correctly. So I do think that there's value in that, and that is one way around some of a very valuable way around some of the concerns when data is identified. And sorry, I forgot to say this is Yvonne at the beginning. So I definitely think that's a valuable approach.
Yeah, it's interesting. Thank you, Yvonne. I know it's really difficult to do the closed caption things. This is Elizabeth. Yeah, so just in thinking about, you know, the broader issues here. Just thinking about what are the important aspects. Some of those have come up. What's next? What's the friction that needs to be overcome? And for example, one of the key areas that were discussed in some of the last meetings is that, this is a complex system problem. And Yvonne, you're speaking to that to some degree. And, we're hearing that from a policy perspective as well. Carmel, as you were articulating, is sort of tricky, right, to get the Goldilocks scenario just right. One of the issues that folks were raising is that a lot of the issues around not just security, but also around enabling licensing, the whole question about the global and standardizing the data across the world. We don't, the perspective was that we weren't yet building systems with the end in mind on that front. So there was a lot of dialogue around what's needed in terms of architecture and the like. And there's discussion around centralized data repositories, versus the decentralized frameworks, and sort of the inevitability of some centralization and what that might mean. So as we just wrap up here, I also want to remind, if anybody wants to to interject anything else, I'd love to hear just sort of some closing comments of what folks think is really important. And I will just go around the bend, if that's okay. Don, may I pass the mic first to you to get your contribution? This is Elizabeth. I'm done.
Yeah, just a closing comment. I think we've done a very poor job as a society and as regulators explaining the downstream consequences of data. When you go to that doctor's office and sign that HIPAA form, one of the provisions is that they can use that data for anything necessary in the deliverance of your care. And you probably haven't thought that means they use it for everything, including sharing it with the billing company that they use, so that they can bill more correctly, to helping search files to find candidates for clinical trials, and a whole bunch of other things. In other words, we don't spell out all the consequences of signing those forms and what those data actually may be used for in those various use cases. So as a result, the average consumer is kind of blind when they're because they're blind to the consequences when they're asked to sign. So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to participate, Elizabeth. Thanks.
Thanks, Don. I appreciate that. Carmel, may I ask you to go next? This is Elizabeth. I'm done speaking.
I think that one kind of theme and takeaway that I'd love to emphasize is that good data regulation and data dignity doesn't happen by accident, right? We shouldn't take the monkeys banging at a typewriter approach to this, but that there do need to be more conversations like this. And I think there needs to be much more education of policymakers about how data is being used right now, and whether the average consumer likes it or doesn't like it, what room there is for improvement. I'd love to see the US kind of as a nation revisit HIPAA and also kind of take a look at GDPR and make very conscious choices about, okay, how do we want to strike a balance between all of these competing interests, as opposed to kind of just letting things evolve haphazardly. So this is Carmel.
Carmel, thank you so much for that. And that's a great segue. One of our next discussions will include policymakers and staffers that participated in a number of these, particularly the HIPAA and the California privacy regs and the like. So there'll be an opportunity to have a discussion on that front. So thank you for that, and we'd love to have you back for that important dialogue. All right, I'd like to turn the floor to Yvonne. Yvonne?
Yeah, hi, this is Yvonne with some closing thoughts. I think a couple things that will be necessary will be educating people so that they know to care. I've spoken to many people that just don't care what happens to their data. They don't know or understand enough to know why they should care. And once they know that, they may still not care, but they should at least have the knowledge to make an informed decision about that. And then in terms of moving forward, I think it will be valuable to lay down some principles, and then policy and regulations and technological mechanisms can be designed to achieve the aims of those principles. But if we don't have a guiding set of principles, we'll be all over the map in trying to do some of those things. So that was Yvonne.
Thank you, Yvonne. I appreciate that. Yeah, the devil's in the details, and being the practical operations person here on the panel that actually has to build these systems and oversee it. I really appreciate that as well. Okay, Amber, may I turn the floor to you?
Sure. Well, I think that for me, the thing that I heard in this conversation, and that I think is really important to consider, is how people have the capacity to care, for one. The idea of caring about where my data is being collected, or what's happening with that, or what the implications are to me. I think it's really challenging for someone to care about that when their basic needs aren't met, when this kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs comes into my mind, at least as something, it's a complex problem, the issue of having people care, or the capacity to care. But I think that we can do things to improve the likelihood of it getting on someone's radar. And, that's, I think also such an important piece is that there's, without the knowledge, without the, even it being, kind of something that you're aware of, you wouldn't know them in a case of being exploited. And the unfortunate thing is that I think the people who often, would not have it on their radar already are the ones who would be exploited. And I was just thinking about one of the comments I had heard about the exploitation, or potential exploitation, had me thinking about, I think it was 2017 or 18, there was a factory in Wisconsin that started implanting RFID chips in their employees. And they did that because they got some sort of I think it was as nominal as $50 credit that they could use on the vending machines and things like that. And it was going to save time opening doors and things like this, giving access on the property itself. And so there is a need for legislation that protects people from organizations, companies really exploiting their employees or their communities. And so, just thinking about if somebody were to, at this point, offer money for your data, do you even know what the value of that is? How do we assess the value of that? So, anyways, that's where all. That's a I thought that I had in listening.
I got it. No, I appreciate that very much, Amber. And it's good to get diverse opinions and a different set of perspectives. So thank you for the contribution. Okay, so I know we're getting ready to wrap up. I just want to thank our panelists and audience for the thoughtful discussion. Lots here and lots more to come. Obviously, this is one in a series of dialogue around this topic. And deep gratitude to Julie for helping pull this room together. And I know we're just going to close out. So Julie, I'm going to pass it back to you for a couple of, actually, do we have, oh yes, you're here. Okay, good. I'm sorry, you were at the bottom for a while of me, and then I see you're back at the top. So I'll just let you close us out.
Great. Hopefully I don't disappear on you again. My app shut down earlier, so let's try this one more time.
Okay.
Thanks everyone for joining. Really appreciate the contribution to the conversation here today. In closing, again, I'm Julie Szmyd. I'm project manager at Consuli and host for this room and club. We are Consuli Conversations. Please be sure to follow our club by tapping on the little green house at the top. You'll that way get notifications when we do host our rooms, and our rooms are listed in our bio. In addition to this, we also host our clinical trials room happening tomorrow and our long COVID patients meet researchers room, both really great rooms. So love to have you pop into those. Be sure to check out everybody's profile, make sure you're following everyone on the panel, the moderators, and anyone else that interests you in the room. For direct questions, comments, feedback, suggestions, if you know anyone else who might want to participate, needs an invite or wants to be on the panel, please, by all means, you'll find my email in my bio. You'll also find Consuli social medias in my bio. Please do follow us. And then for those that don't yet know Consuli broadly, we're a public benefit company with the mission to enable individuals to participate in the data economy. I will invite that person. With experts suggesting our individual data being worth $20K per year, we want to help people take control to choose who gets access to and how their personal health information is used. And if and when desired, get them paid for their data, all while making medicine better. And we do this by operating a marketplace for members where we become their agent. Our members received smart matched individualized offers from us for opportunities, including participating in trials. And there's no cost to join our movement. You can learn more at consuli.net. It's consuli.net. Please sign up, join the movement. Looking forward to our next Clubhouse discussion. I'll leave this room open just for a little bit longer. John, I see you came up. I don't know if you had a question, but
hi.
Welcome.
Thanks, Julie. I just dropped in. I saw my friend Amber's here, so I thought if Amber's here, it's got to be.
Hey, John.
I haven't talked to you for a while, but I don't want to take everybody's. I know everybody's getting ready to go, but I did just start a side project called Javelin.com, helping make sure no vaccine doses go to waste and try and connect people with appointments. We're going to start collecting we're developing like a notification system called Jav Alerts to let people know when expired doses are available. But we're going to start collecting like name, email, probably some basic demographic information to do some matching of appointments to people that need them. Is there any resource that would offer some sort of good, we're going to protect your data, we're not going to share it with anyone, type of like MIT license where we use the software where it's like you could subscribe to it, don't have to write your own, well thought out data integrity policy. Don't know if there's somebody directly on the panel that might be a good follow-up for that, or if there's a resource you could point me to, that would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, John, if you want to, Julie's information is in her bio. If you email her, I think her email is in there. I'm not sure if mine is. Feel free to do that and we can follow up with you. Happy to share what we know. Yeah, so thanks for joining. And just in the interest of time, I'm going to say goodbye to everyone and thanks so much again. Really look forward to next time.
Thanks for hosting this.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. And thanks, John. Yeah, my email is in my bio, so please, by all means, reach out.
Definitely, will do. Thanks, Julie.
Great.
And, loving this clubhouse.
Yeah, right? It's fun.
Yeah, it's like first week on it. I was like, wow, this is a lot more interesting than I thought it would be.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a rabbit hole too. You'll
Yeah,
get sucked
this is
in.
actually my first time being on the stage, so.
Oh, okay.
Yay.
Cool. Yay. It's a nice soft landing here. So great.
Very good. Very good.
Hope you join us again.
I'll be in touch.
Great. Take care. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.